Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Vayera, and the first story in the Parsha is one where angels dressed as men come to Avram and reveal to him within earshot of Sarah that she's going to have a child. And as we know, what happens is it says she's listening inside the tent near the door. And what does she do? She laughs inwardly. God comes then to Avram and he tells him, why is Sarah, your wife, laughing that you're going to have a child? Doesn't she understand that God is capable of performing miracles? Avram then goes to Sarah and confronts her with this fact, and she denies it. Now, I think besides being a story of revelation of the fact that Sarah is going to have a child, I think the Torah also is revealing us something about Sarah's character, about her personality type. And I like to think, as many commentaries do, that the avos and the imos, the forefathers and foremothers, represent to us symbolically certain character traits. They're archetypes. So Avram is the personality trait of chesed, of kindness, and Sarah is the personality trait of gevura, of strength. And we understand strength as someone who can stoically accept that which is coming their way. As it says in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Fathers, Ezehu Gibor, who is strong, hakovesh es yitzro, someone who can control his inclination. So control is what, inner strength is really what defines gevura, strength, not outer strength. That might be one manifestation, but the inner core of it is what's within inside of you. And that's what Sarah has. And we see that in the first story when she's taken captive in Egypt. She doesn't have a speaking part. She accepts her fate. And last week's portion we had also where Sarah comes to Avram and she says, Hinei no atzurani Hashem miledis, God has held me back from giving birth. Take my maidservant as a wife, and perhaps ulai ibanim emenim, perhaps she will build a family with you on my behalf. She's not angry. She's not upset. She seems to be very accepting of her fate, and therefore she calmly goes forward and does what's necessary. But then we see that there's a little bit of a change in Sarah. When Hagar, her maidservant, becomes pregnant and doesn't treat her in the correct way, the way Sarah thinks she should be treated, she says to Avram, Chamasi alecha, my anger is against you. Yishpot Hashem b'ni v'necha, God should judge between me and you. And here we see that when she's finally told she's going to have a child, she's unbelieving. She laughs, she says, it's not possible. What's going on, I think, is that when you take a personality trait like strength, inner strength and control, and you have it, or you possess it in the extreme, along with that comes certain weaknesses, certain problems. One is that repression is something which you can't contain forever. Very few people can completely control themselves all the time. We need a little balance in our life. And the way I understand the stories developing between Avram and Sarah is both Avram and Sarah start developing other personality types or traits in order to balance their personality. And that happens with Sarah later on. But in the beginning stories of Sarah, perhaps what the Torah is telling us is a lesson. If you only have repression without any outlets, it's not healthy. At a certain point, you just can't control yourself anymore. And that calm attitude of, don't worry, I can't have a child, take my maidservant, is triggered by Hagar's treatment of her, and all of a sudden she's angry, and she takes out her anger on Avram, her husband. Perhaps she was right, but it doesn't seem to be within her character as we've seen her before. And she's saying chamasi. Chamasi is a very strong word. It's the word used, chamas, which it says the generation of the flood possessed, and that's why God destroyed the world. It's anger, almost violence. And here we see another outgrowth of that when she's told that she's going to have a child, she's repressed it. It's so much, she dealt with it by saying, it's not going to happen, and now I can move forward. She doesn't want to have the anxiety associated with not having children, so therefore she puts it out of her mind completely. and she's willing to accept that she's not going to have a child. So much so that when God comes and says he'll give her a child, she says, not possible. She laughs. So that anxiety that she's trying to avoid was actually there all the time. That the repression that she had creates a very inner anxiety, which at a certain point bursts forward, as it did with the story of Avram before. And here it comes out that she's laughing and she's denying that God could perform miracles. And then what does it say? It says God came to Avram, as I mentioned before, and said, why did you laugh? And Sarah denies it. And again, it is deniable because it says, Vatitzchak Sarah b'kirba. Sarah laughed within herself. She didn't laugh out loud. This is something that we all do. We all have feelings and emotions that we deny. As long as we didn't express it outwardly, and sometimes even when we do, we're able to deny it. We're able to say, no, I'm not really feeling bad. I'm not feeling sad. I'm not angry. I'm not jealous. I'm not anxious. And that's what Sarah's doing. She says she laughed inwardly, but then she denies it. And she's not just denying it as a liar, I believe, but rather she's denying it within herself. And therefore, the Torah is teaching us a very simple lesson, that any trait, however valuable it is, however good it is, however promising it is, in order to create a sort of strong personality, in this sense that she has this inner strength, which is really something which is admirable. If you have it only in the extreme, without the balance of sometimes letting steam off, dealing with some of the issues, not always being inward, but also somehow being outer directed. Without that balance, you're going to lose it eventually. And perhaps that's a simple lesson, as I mentioned, of this week's portion. And eventually, Sarah, her laughter is not one of denial anymore. Later on, when she does have a child, Yitzchak, it says that Kol Hashamei Yitzchakli, whoever listens, whoever hears that I have a child, will be laughing for me. You could interpret that different ways, but the way I like to interpret it is she's now saying, now the laughter that I have is one of happiness. And I'm willing to have that happiness. I'm willing to express myself. Someone who's repressed doesn't usually express emotions at all. And therefore, although there she's saying other people will laugh for me, that might be just the beginning stage of saying, I have those emotions too. By saying other people will be happy with me or for me, that's really saying, now I understand what it means to have laughter. Now I understand what it means to be happy. Now I understand what it means to deal with some of the problems that I had in my life. Certain stages in your life, perhaps it's better to repress, to control. But anything that's not balanced and anything in extreme is generally harmful for us. And as Avram and Sarah go through their lives, and as we read the stories of Avram and Sarah, if you look at it carefully, I think you could see that these people, these great forefathers and foremothers, they develop personalities which have different traits also. They might have a primary trait of kindness, chesed, or a primary trait of gevura, of strength, but hopefully the purpose is that they develop the opposite, a complementary trait also, that they see in their spouse. Avram sees it in Sarah, Sarah sees it in Avram, they learn from each other, and by the end of the story, we're closer to where both Avram and Sarah have both traits. One is a primary, one secondary, but they're closer to a balance, and that's the balance that we all seek in our lives. Good Shabbos.